Oh, hello there. It's me, Contrarius the Gray. You know, you're the perfect person to talk to. I have a long ride ahead of me, and I have something that I've been wanting to get off my chest for quite a while now. I don't think you're gonna like this very much, but I think Lord of the Rings is pretty overrated. I feel like I'm crazy here. I don't see what the hubbub is all about. And it's very confusing. People always say it's the Lord of the Rings trilogy. What trilogy? There's only one movie. See? Lord of the Rings. And it sucks. Everyone always raves about how great the characters are in Lord of the Rings. And I'm sorry, but which characters? We have the rude-ass wizard who breaks into people's houses and starts acting up.
One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them.
That was a real cut in the movie. I did not do that myself. He also can't get his lines straight. It's like he's making some of this shit up.
I must go south now to consult with the wizard Aruman.
Aruman? Who the fuck is Aruman?
I have come for your aid, Saruman the White, in troubled times.
Oh, Saruman. Why'd you say that other shit? Like, how do you see this word on your script and read it as Aruman? How do you keep messing this up?
You had to bring a wizard at all. Perhaps it should have been his friend Aruman.
Look, now you got him saying it. And if we're being honest, the rest of the Fellowship is pretty forgettable too. Everybody says Aragorn is so cool. Yeah, he looks really cool, guys. And then we have this fruity little freak Frodo.
Gandalf, it's really you. Oh, it's been so long.
Bro, relax. I don't even remember most of the other people because they don't really say or do anything. They're just kind of there. Supposedly this guy is a dwarf. He kind of just looks like a slightly shorter human. Like, that's just a guy. This guy looks more like a dwarf. But no, that's Boromir. Anyway, then we have Sam, who's probably the most wretched, foul, disturbing creature I have ever seen.
Oh, my. Oh, hooray!
I hate this guy. He just fills me with disgust. He doesn't act like Frodo's friend or companion. He acts like his creepy little pet. Now, everybody told me that Gollum was like this creepy little freaky dude, but if you look past the fact that he looks like a Dark Souls enemy, he acts more normal than Sam does. He kind of just talks like a regular dude.
I promise I will serve the master of the precious.
Seems fine to me. Everybody else in this movie is such a freak that it makes him look normal. This movie's also made in a really weird way. That's kind of the only way I can say it. I thought this was just a cartoon, and I like cartoons, but sometimes this isn't a cartoon. Sometimes it looks like shit. Sometimes there's just like a cartoon character standing next to a normal guy. Half the time it's not even for aesthetic purposes. There's like no rhyme or reason to it most of the time. It's like shitty fantasy Roger Rabbit. This isn't even animated. That's just the moon. Sometimes this movie isn't animated enough. And sometimes it's a little too animated. The rotoscoping is used to make everything look more realistic, but it just makes everybody look like they're moving unnaturally. Look how much this guy is moving. He's like a fighting game character. And worst of all, everybody tells me that Lord of the Rings has the most satisfying conclusion ever. What do you mean? There's no conclusion. It covers the first 2 books, and then it just ends.
The forces of darkness were driven forever from the face of Middle-earth by the valiant friends of Frodo.
What? The story's just over? Frodo's still lost in the forest with 2 crackheads. I gotta say, I do like that this movie is funny, but I don't think that's intentional.
Well then, look.
So I'm sorry, guys, but I'm gonna have to give Lord of the Rings a 3. What? Oh, those movies. Duh! Yeah, those are pretty good. Okay, yes, I'm done goofing around. I'm actually gonna review the good movies now. But I'll be honest, I've really been putting this one off. Because what is there left to say that hasn't already been said by everybody? I could just say, yeah, these movies are perfect, 11 out of 10, and nobody would argue with me. Because it's no exaggeration when I say that Lord of the Rings is definitively the most influential fantasy series of all time. Tolkien may not have invented elves and dwarves, those have always existed in folklore, but he did popularize the concept of dwarves being haughty, reclusive mountain dwellers that are kind of racist. Sorry guys, elves don't sit on shelves, and they don't make Christmas presents. In this universe, they live in the trees, and they're kind of dicks, and they're also ninjas. The landscape for World of Warcraft, Warhammer, D&D, A Song of Ice and Fire, and literally every single conceivable fantasy world was shaped by Lord of the Rings. And yeah, you're allowed to not like Lord of the Rings, but you definitely like something that was inspired by it. And it helps that the movies are pretty good. So I'm gonna do my best to talk about them and explain why I love them. But first, a bit of background. When I was a kid, I watched the first movie when it came out, and I thought, this is scary. It's also boring. Where's the magic and the whimsy? But look, don't blame me. I was a fucking kid. I was in elementary school. I was drawing shit like this in my notebook. It took a specific type of thing to keep my attention. Also, none of my friends liked Lord of the Rings either, so for a few years, Lord of the Rings just passed me by. But then, when I became a teenager, I was like, you know what? I like movies. I'm into nerd stuff now. I like fantasy. I'm a grown-up. Let me give this one more shot. So I sat down and decided to watch The Two Towers, and then it all made sense. And since that day, I have been in love with these movies. So yeah, for me, these are the kinds of movies that are really hard to talk about because they kind of do everything right. Like, I could talk about how the music is perfect, because it just is. The number of identifiable songs in this trilogy is only rivaled by, like, Star Wars. One day they went up to Howard Shore and they told him, hey man, we really need a theme song for Gandalf's horse. And he said, sorry, let me just pop the fuck off for no reason. This is the one series that does just about everything right, and everybody's already talked about it for years. So I'm definitely not going to be able to cover everything, but I'll do my best. These movies have a lot of shit in them. Oh, and one thing I should mention is that I have not read the books. I'm not an expert here. I watch movies. I don't read that nerd shit. Go to audible.com/Cosmonaut to receive. So the main focus of this video is going to be the movies. But of course, most of the genius of the story goes back to Tolkien and his ideas. But anyway, put that first movie on. This is the best one. This is the best Lord of the Rings movie. If you disagree, die. It's been many years by now, but I can easily say it's probably one of my favorite movies ever made. Everything that made this series great is on full display here. This is easily the most D&D movie of the bunch. If you love Dungeons and Dragons, you are subconsciously just recreating this movie in one way or another. It's literally about people who don't know each other, meeting up, going on an adventure together. They meet a guy in a tavern to get a quest. Some of the party members don't even get along. Some of them aren't even supposed to be there. They're just related to the DM, so they're here anyway. They get item upgrades that eventually help them in later entries, like rope and McDonald's Sprite. And I'm actually kind of sad that the Fellowship is only around for a small part of the story. It's not really criticism, but I love this group together so much that I wish we could have seen them interact with each other a little bit longer. But anyway, to start things off, I've always said that the most important part of any movie is how it starts. Think of some of the most iconic films of all time. I would bet you all of them start things off with a bang. Rosebud? Who the fuck is Rosebud? Wait, this movie looks awesome. How old is this? What the fuck? Ooh, hey, sexy lady swimming in the ocean. I didn't know this was a good movie. She's dead. She gets killed by a fish. Oh, Lord of the Rings? Isn't that the movie where people walk to a mountain for 12 hours? What the fuck? This rocks! This opening scene is pretty fucking cool. I'm normally very critical of a movie starting with a lot of exposition, but Galadriel's monologue, accompanied with quick, effective, striking imagery, works really well. No shot lingers for too long. This is the only time we ever see Sauron for the entire series, and it doesn't matter because we get the idea. He's a bad dude. And the thing is, the beginning of this movie overall is pretty laid back. It's just a bunch of white people sitting around and smoking weed. So starting the movie off with an epic recap like this is perfect for hooking in the viewer. And right after that, we get another bit of exposition from Bilbo about hobbits. Except, depending on what version you're watching, that might not happen. That's right, I gotta real quick talk about the extended editions. If you're weird and you don't know, these movies have two editions. The versions that came out in theaters and the versions that came out later on DVD. And a lot of people swear by the extended editions. Now here's my biggest and most fucked up hot take of all time. I don't think the extended editions are as perfect as everybody claims.
You need to leave!
Now there are a lot of scenes from the extended cuts that I think are really good and add a lot to the movies. And some of them are really important, like this one with Bilbo at the beginning of the entire trilogy. I understand that 2 scenes of exposition are kind of a lot for an audience who's trying to get into this world. But in this case, I think Bilbo explaining what hobbits are and how they work is pretty important. And I think the theatrical cut would have benefited greatly from at least a condensed version of his monologue. If I pretend I'm someone who's watching this movie for the first time and I've never heard of Lord of the Rings, I'm gonna be a little bit more lost than I need to be. Why is this like a hairy little baby? Who are these people? However, I think that beyond Bilbo's little rundown of hobbits, there isn't really anything else in the extended edition of this movie that is really necessary. Bilbo hiding from the Sackville Bagginses is not really that important. Hobbits gossiping about Bilbo is not that important. Sam and Frodo seeing elves walking around, and then Sam talking about elf songs. You get my point. It's a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. Yes, it does flesh out the world, and it's great if you just want more of this universe. And like I said, I watch these movies all the time, but I still save the extended editions for special occasions. Because at their worst, they kind of actively hurt the pacing of each movie. But I'm going to get into that a little bit later. The thing is, I know a shitload of people who don't like Lord of the Rings because one of their fucking nerd-ass loser friends were like, "Oh dude, you haven't seen Lord of the Rings? Okay, we're gonna sit down and watch all the extended editions back to back. You have to sit here for 12 hours. Yeah, here's my problem with that. All the biggest fans of these movies did not experience them for the first time in that way. They watched the theatrical versions, they fell in love with the world, and then the extended editions came out later, and it helped people grow a new appreciation for the trilogy. This is a PSA to stop doing this to your friends. They don't want to watch 4-hour-long movies about a bunch of little hairy white people. I really do think there is value in the fact that the theatrical cut has a bit more respect for the audience's time. But again, there's some stuff in these movies that really shouldn't have been cut, and there's some stuff that's better off not being in them. But anyway, one thing that is indisputably perfect about these movies is the effects. Now yeah, if you watch these movies as much as I do, you're gonna get to a point where you think, wait a minute, that looks a little weird. But if a movie takes 10 viewings to start showing signs of age, I think that's a pretty good sign. I love how many times in this movie the camera just sweeps through a combination of practical and computer imagery. Some of these shots have miniature models, green-screened actors, dynamic camera movement, and CG elements. And it blends together to create magic. And honestly, the best effects are the ones that are nearly impossible to notice. A lot of scenes use perspective tricks to have both actors in the same place while still looking like they're different in size. That's pretty cool, right? But everybody knows about that. The scenes that impress me are the ones where they use primitive-ass computer effects to create some of the most convincing shit I've ever seen. It took me until just now, while editing, to realize that Gandalf in this scene is just green screened in. Bilbo is the focus of the shot, and he and the camera move in such a way that your brain didn't even register that Ian McKellen's walking around the background and he's not even really there. These are two people shot at different times, handing objects to each other seamlessly. It's so normal looking that most people don't even register that it's a special effect. But of course, there are some scenes that haven't aged as perfectly. Some of the green screen looks kind of iffy in the later movies. And there's other visual stuff, like the fact that some of the signs look like they're printed from a fucking printer. And my biggest visual nitpick is that I hate these fucking rails outside of Sauron's tower. It looks like they shot this at the park. It looks like Disneyland. It's hilarious to me that this is right across the street from this. But anyway, after the amazing intro, this movie does slow down a lot. I think the first movie is a perfect example of a slow burn. The pacing is very effective. We speed up a little bit, and then we slow down. We speed up, and then we slow down, all leading us up to a final battle and a sad farewell. It's just so good. Most of the first third is just devoted to building the world and the story, and by the time our heroes are on their way, we are constantly introduced to new concepts and characters. It's so simple that it seems like a no-brainer, but there are so many stories that struggle to keep the attention of the audience with such a long runtime. We get thrown so many bits of insane information, and it makes you want to learn more about this world. I don't really need to know that Gandalf is an angel, and that Aragorn is like half immortal or whatever. I don't care about that. I'm simply intrigued when they tell me that Frodo will be turned into a ring wraith because he got stabbed by one of them. How does that even work? Well, what would that even look like? I love all the little behind the scenes details, like the fact that Viggo Mortensen actually deflected the knife in this scene. Like, that's so fucking cool. And a lot of people do speak fondly about the behind the scenes stuff because it's just as entertaining as the actual movie.
Do you wear wigs?
No, I do not.
Have you worn wigs?
No, I have not.
Will you wear wigs?
Maybe.
When will you wear wigs?
And I really just love everything about this movie, flaws and all. It constantly ramps up the sense of adventure without getting stale. It leaves off with so many open threads that you actually genuinely have no idea what's coming next if you haven't seen these movies before. It has the best blend of magical whimsy and perilous fantasy adventure. It's a perfect start to the trilogy, and I can safely say it's a masterpiece. 10 out of 10. You know, that title always confused me. I always wondered why Tolkien named the second book that. Because, like, yeah, there's 2 towers, but one of the towers is in the B plot. And if you only watch the movies, you don't even know what the other tower is. It's not that one. It's, like, somewhere back there or something. And imagine being Peter Jackson in 2001, right after 9/11, going up to the guys at WB and saying, hey, yeah, so this movie is going to be called The Two Towers.
What? No!
Anyway, like I said, this was the Lord of the Rings movie that really sold me on the series. I was a little kid who had it in his head that Lord of the Rings ain't all it's cracked up to be. And the scene that really changed my entire perspective is the first scene in the movie. Now, every Lord of the Rings movie opens very strongly. The opening is very important for putting you in the right mindset. In Fellowship, they spend time getting you acquainted with this new world that you probably haven't seen before. In Return of the King, they show you Smeagol's story so you finally understand him. And in this movie, they show you the coolest fucking thing you've ever seen. Pretend that you have not seen this movie or the next one. You only saw Fellowship, you're going to the theater, and you sit down, and this is the first scene that you see. The camera pans across the Misty Mountains, a location that we've seen before. But why are we seeing this now? That was in the last movie. But then, we hear the voice of Gandalf. We hear the voice of the other Fellowship members. It sounds like a scene from Fellowship, the one where he dies fighting the Balrog. Oh shit, it is that scene. Why are we seeing this again? This is like shot for shot the same stuff. We've already spent time mourning this character. But then, instead of the silent, somber scene that we saw in the last movie, the music booms as it follows Gandalf into the pit. Just listen to how the music seems like it's pursuing him. This isn't a heroic sacrifice, and Gandalf isn't fucking dead yet, baby. And my god, look at this fucking shot. Believe me when I tell you, this scene ruined me. Because since that day, I have thought wizards are just the coolest. And Harry Potter didn't convince me of that. Oh, let me study and pass my test. Fuck that. Fighting ancient demons, smoking weed, going on adventures, all as an old dude. Gandalf is just one of the coolest characters ever conceived. He's wise without being too arrogant and annoying about it. He has a sense of humor. He loves all the people of Middle-earth. And he also owns an elvish sword called the Foe Hammer. And when he sees world-ending demons, he talks shit to them, calls them a bitch, and then fights them for 10 days straight. This solidified it for me. From this point on, I have been a wizard at heart. If there's a game where I can choose to be a wizard, I will usually be the wizard. I didn't even have to buy this costume like I usually do. I already owned this. I had other wizard robes to choose from too. I've got a nice fancy purple one. I like the hat on this. Look at that. That's cool, right? And a lot of people say, oh, if I was in Middle Earth, I'd want to be a hobbit and eat all day and live in a hole. Yeah, I think you're fucking crazy if you think that way. You're a fucking lunatic. You want to be a dirty-footed cracker with an eating disorder? Cool. All right, that's fine. Good for you. But you know what? You can do that in real life. You can just go be a farmer and live on the countryside if you want to. You're allowed to do that. Where the fuck is the escapism in being a hobbit? You're just a regular guy. That's not even the coolest race in this series. It's goblins. You should be a goblin. Goblins are better. If it was up to me, I'd be a fucking wizard. Smoking that Zaza, hanging out with the king of horses, casting spells, doing whatever the fuck I want.
Gandalf the White. Gandalf the Fool.
Oh shit, he actually got his ass with that one. But anyway, I gotta say, despite everything I just said, I think this is probably my least favorite movie in the trilogy. And that's not to say it's bad at all. It's just that, well, one of them has to be in last place. And I just think that after such a wonderfully paced first movie, this one struggles a lot more with how much ground it has to cover. See, the thing is, this movie was a little more complicated to make, because the big man wrote Fellowship in a way that makes for a pretty solid movie. I know he didn't intend for that, but it just fucking happened that way. But then when you get to Two Towers, it gets a little awkward. The first half of the book shows what Merry and Pippin and Aragorn's gang are doing, and then halfway through all that stops, and we see everything that Frodo was doing at the same time. And then it ends with Frodo getting murked by the spider. Now, if you adapted this one for one, it really wouldn't leave, like, anything for Sam and Frodo to do in the finale. So Peter Jackson and the gang had to do a lot to make this work for a movie. And honestly, with all of that considered, I think they did a pretty good job. This movie is kind of the best you can do with what you're given. But the main problem I have is that the story here really isn't as engaging as in the previous one. This is no longer a story about a ragtag group of people going across the land encountering new threats. Now we gotta flesh out the world with the humans and their political conflicts. We are introduced to a lot of new characters, but honestly the most interesting plots are still the ones that feature the hobbits. Merry and Pippin being promoted to more important characters is a lot of fun to watch, and I really like their adventure in this one. I do have to say, though, that I'm really not into the Aragorn love triangle in this trilogy. I think it's honestly probably the worst part of all the movies. It's not very oppressive, but it is there, and it's not my favorite. All of this stuff is kind of important for fleshing out the world because we honestly haven't seen a lot of humans in here up until this point, but I'm just saying that there is a lot of downtime when you compare this movie to the other two. And whenever I show someone this trilogy for the first time, they always kind of just tune out most of the things that happen in this one, which I think is interesting. Like, I often think about that one subplot where Aragorn and the gang get attacked by wolves, and then he, like, falls off a cliff, and he goes on this elvish spirit journey, and it kind of feels like it was just thrown into the movie to keep things more exciting. And yeah, then I learned this isn't in the fucking book at all. Jackson just added it because he thought the movie was getting boring. But, like, you can tell because it feels like a weird, aimless distraction. It's a good thing that Peter Jackson didn't go on to add a bunch of other needless shit to the series. That would be really annoying. But anyway, in true sequel fashion, this movie does introduce a lot of characters, but one of them does steal the show. Wow, look at that guy. He's so disgusting. I love him. Gollum really is the most impressive part of this movie, technically and narratively. Like, yeah, most people would say the Battle of Helm's Deep is the most iconic thing about the second movie, and whatever, sure, it's cool. They're right, I guess. But if you ask me, this is really the Gollum movie. Andy Serkis revolutionized the art of computer-generated performances, and his introduction in this movie adds so much tension and intrigue to the story. Fellowship was about spectacle and adventure. It has a strong focus on seeing new things and experiencing new threats. But this movie is more about fleshing out the characters that we haven't really gotten that much characterization for. Gimli and Legolas start their little bickering friendship, Merry and Pippin become more than just comic relief, and Gollum shows us just how evil the ring is. We see for the first time how bad things could get if Frodo doesn't dump that thing in the volcano really soon. And I love the subplot in this movie where Gollum struggles to push the dark side of himself away and do the right thing, only to be convinced, tragically, that doing the right thing will only ever cause him pain. And I also love how much Frodo hates Gollum up until he basically looks him in the eye. Because Frodo is like a really nice guy, but then when Gandalf tells him about Gollum, he's like, fuck that guy. I wish Bilbo fucking killed him. He deserves to die. And even Gandalf is like, bro, chill. And I really love Gollum's design too. He's perfectly wretched and kind of strangely adorable, which is important for making us feel bad for him. And overall, the designs of everything in these movies is spot on. One of the most interesting things to do is to look up art of the books before the movies even existed. It's so cool to see how different people in different countries over multiple decades have interpreted the characters completely differently. And it's fun to see how Jackson's crew translated all of these interpretations into one unified vision, because some of this stuff is very conceptual. Like Tolkien describes the Balrog like this. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form, of man shape maybe, yet greater, and a power and terror seemed to be in it and to go before it. Like, how the fuck do you draw that? And I think it's interesting that many artists agree on Gollum being basically just a naked little weirdo, even though Tolkien himself said that he imagines Gollum as wearing dark clothing. So like, how did you all get to this point? That's just so interesting to me. I think it's so cool to see different interpretations of the same character over the years. But anyway, the main draw of this movie, the thing that everybody remembers it for, is the Battle of Helm's Deep. And honestly, this battle still stands as the most iconic fantasy action scene to be put to screen. And when you remember that the Game of Thrones crew said that their little dimly lit embarrassment was going to rival this iconic climax, that's still very funny to me. I'll never let that go. The battle itself is nearly 40 minutes long, and it has to remain engaging for that entire time, and it manages to pull that off. Narratively, it's important for the battle to always feel like it's getting worse, because we're shown and told that there's really no way that the forces of Helm's Deep can succeed on their own. They have to hold out. But if this was just 40 minutes straight of them getting their shit shoved in, that really wouldn't be interesting to watch. The tone of the entire scene would just stay the same. So within the battle, we have tiny moments of levity, not enough to ruin the tone, but enough to break up the scenes of things getting worse and worse, with scenes of things getting maybe a little bit better. But as the battle goes worse for our heroes, and we hit our lowest point, that's when the triumph begins. Instead of having a scene where everything is going bad until the very end when our heroes win out of nowhere, Aragorn and the gang have to earn their victory with a last stand. And their bravery is progressively rewarded until victory is at hand. The pacing, the set pieces, the characterization, everything in this scene works so well. And while this isn't my favorite Lord of the Rings movie, it does have a lot of my favorite Lord of the Rings moments, like this one. So yeah, this movie is gonna get a 9 out of 10. That seems good. Now let's finish this. Return of the King is the Lord of the Rings movie that's full of payoff. This movie is such a fitting and satisfying conclusion that even the Academy was like, yeah, I guess we're gonna have to give Best Picture to the Nerd movie. Oh, and let's just go ahead and give them every other award too.
This is the 11th Academy Award win tonight for The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King.
And I think that that is just so fucking cool. A long-ass movie about a wizard fighting some ghosts and goblins won the Academy Award for Best Picture. That shit just doesn't happen, and it helps that the movie actually earned it. Return of the King begins with a flashback showing Gollum's past, and while it isn't as action-packed as the openings from the other movies, this is a lot more effective in setting up the tone for this movie. This is a deeply disturbing and emotional scene to start the movie on, and honestly, that's the tone of this movie. And seeing how Gollum got to this point is key in getting us invested in the journey that Frodo and his gang are about to go on. Because while they didn't have a lot to do in the last movie, this one is where they get tested the most and where the ring really starts to be a little bastard. But after that scene, we get something very baffling. See, I've been defending the theatrical cut of these movies, but there's one thing that was cut from the theatrical versions that I cannot accept. Saruman. Yes, that's it. Saruman in his entirety is cut out of this movie. It blows my mind that audiences that watch these movies in theaters never see what happens to one of the main villains. And in the uncut version, we don't just get payoff for Saruman, we get payoff for Wormtongue's character. And it's hilarious to me that the last time we ever see Saruman in the theatrical cut, he's just up in his penthouse like, "Hey yo, what the fuck?" And it's just so weird that they would cut this scene. We don't even see Saruman in this version. They just say, "Oh yeah, he's up there in his apartment. Just leave him there. He's not going anywhere." And we're supposed to just accept that. Saruman just gets left in his tower forever and never does anything ever again? That doesn't sound right. And it's really annoying because outside of Saruman and a few other scenes that I think are cute, I don't really like the extended edition of this movie. I greatly prefer the theatrical cut. Scenes kind of go on for just a little bit too long, and usually it's not for a good reason. But at its worst, it actually causes the movie to have less tension. Let me explain what I mean. So in this movie, Aragorn and the boys have to go on a side quest to go to the Funky Ghoul Mountain and recruit an army of ghosts to help them with the big battle. They show up and the ghosts are like, "Hey, why would we help you?" And then Aragorn is like, "Bro, I'm the king, you gotta help me." And then the scene ends before we see what happens. And then we don't see Aragorn, Gimli, or Legolas for 40 minutes. We watch the battle get worse, fucking demon dragons are tearing up the city, Gandalf can't even fight everybody off. And then we cut to Frodo, he's having problems of his own, shit is just fucked up. But then, it cuts to the orcs at the harbor who are expecting reinforcements. And then Aragorn pops out. And then we see that he did convince the ghosts, and him and the ghosts saved the fucking day. This builds tension, and it has good payoff. But then, let's see how the extended edition does things. Aragorn enters the cave with the ghosts, but they have to take a minute to walk through the cave and explain what they're doing. Gimli is fucking goofing off, and then Aragorn meets the ghosts, and he asks them for help, and they're like, "Haha, you've activated our spooky prank!" And then they throw a bunch of skulls at them for fucking no reason. So Aragorn, Gimli, and Lego Man leave the ghost cave, and Aragorn is sad because the ghosts don't want to be his friend. And then the ghosts come out and they're like, "Hey, we were just joking. We'll join you." And then Aragorn is like, "Shit, now we gotta get all these ghosts to the battle and we don't have a ride." So then they steal a boat and then they ride to the battle. Now, I don't know about you, but I think this is way worse. Now there's no fucking tension at all. We already know he's on his way to save the day. So as the battle gets worse, in the back of your mind, you're like, yeah, but the ghost army's on the way, so it's probably going to be fine. It's just not as narratively compelling. This is the main battle of the movie, and I think that this version actively ruins it. So this leaves us with a weird question. Which version of this movie is better? Do you watch the theatrical cut that is better paced, but locks Saruman in the broom closet? Or do you watch the extended edition that's 4 hours long without really needing to be? At the end of the day, one of these versions has something that's kind of annoying, but it doesn't stop a lot of the emotional moments from hitting as hard. As much as I'm complaining, it's kind of really the only thing I can complain about, because otherwise the movie is fucking amazing. I like the stuff that happens with Minas Tirith, but the real heart of this movie is Sam, Frodo, and Gollum. Their journey is perilous, it's heartbreaking, it's triumphant, and overall, it is so fucking exciting. This storyline has such a gripping level of desperation. Sam and Frodo are literally on their fucking hands and knees, crawling to their destination. And the culmination of all of this tension leads up to the moment in the volcano where your heart just shatters, as Frodo finally, after all this time, loses his sweet soft boy demeanor and gives into the darkness. If you want to see just how fucked up this journey is, look at Frodo in the first movie compared to him in the last movie. And look at how the skin around the ring necklace is all bloody and dry. That's a nice touch. These scenes are the true heart of this movie. Jackson and the gang found great spots to cut away from the fucked up battle to show us what else is going on. Once the second act kicks in, there's virtually no downtime and it never gets exhausting. And there are just so many amazing moments in this movie. Gimli and Legolas finally accepting that they're in love with each other. The battle with the Witch King.
I am no man.
I love the symbolism of everybody bowing down to the hobbits at the end of the movie, letting them finally stand higher than the rest of the world for the first time. I mean it when I say this. If you are trying to learn how to write a satisfying conclusion, you have to analyze every aspect of this story, because this is how you fucking do it. But my favorite scene in the whole trilogy is at the very end, when the boys are finally home. They spent 3 whole movies talking about how much they miss home. It's all they ever fucking talk about. And then when they finally get there, it's just not the same. And the parallels are just perfect. We remember how they were last time they were here. And seeing this is so simple, but so effective. And I know that all of this video has mostly been me talking about the storytelling, but that's really where this movie shines, if you think about it. The effects are always good, the performances are always good, the directing and editing are always good, but the story is fucking fantastic. And at the end of the day, that's what Lord of the Rings should be best at. Because it's a book. For nerds, there is no film trilogy that is this solid from start to finish. So it's really no surprise that I'm going to have to give Return of the King a 9 out of 10. And that's it. It took a while, and it was really hard to talk about these movies because in a lot of ways, they're just too good. It's really, honestly, kind of hard to find anything wrong with them. My only real issue with these movies is that I can't erase them from my brain and watch them all over again for the first time. This is easily, without a doubt, the greatest movie trilogy ever made. And with the amount of dedication, planning, and love that went into these movies, from that point on, Peter Jackson has been known worldwide as the king of adaptations.
If you think about that time, there was incredible planning. There were 3.5 years of pre-production before we rolled the cameras.
Peter never got a chance to prep these movies. I can't say that.
The sequence of events that unfolded on The Hobbit never really allowed for that.
We started all over again from scratch and redesigned the movie for Peter.
Nothing had been formulated at all.
You're winging it. You've got nothing to go on, no storyboards, no previs. You've got these massively complicated scenes and you're just making it up.
Lion fire!
We didn't know what we were doing.
Lion death!
Everyone got hurt on this movie. Everyone was scarred, everyone went through, a little bit of physical kind of pain. But if you're talking about something life-changing, something huge, something that really had a deep effect on all of us, Orlando breaking his rib was huge. He fell off his horse, and the scale double of Gimli fell on top of Orlando and broke his rib.
And I think there was a little bit of jealousy that the hobbits didn't get the opportunity to fall off a horse and break a rib.
It's a painful thing, and it's nothing to be sniggered at. And when he told us, we were, God, are you all right and stuff?
It was painful. It was very painful.
And then when he told us the next day, that's terrible. Is it not getting any better?
Obviously, it was just a rib, and I went and had it checked out, and I was on set again the next day, so it was fine.
A week later, cracked rib? Oh, is it still cracked, is it? Right, okay.
My lungs are hurting. I feel like my pancreas has been split. I think my spleen has been ostracised.
Whinging? Oh, really?
And babes are hurts, and I can't ride the horse, and now babes.
And since then, I've heard it in a few interviews as well, and I think it's still healing.
That's so funny.